But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anything. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
People will return to the people, and so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. They who despise you and slay you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men, with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men, you are men, you are men.
Welcome to the Rock Worldwide Show here on WSHO Sunshine 800 AM. Trey Roberts with you as I am on most Saturdays here in the Big Easy, New Orleans. We try to tee up some big ideas, big topics, and things that hopefully are interesting to you. And we discuss them here. We try to discuss them as best we can from a Christian sort of standpoint. And, of course, we also try to think a little bit outside the box. Try not to fall into groupthink as much as possible. And we try to model for you how to critically think about issues without simply being fed by the mainstream media or by the algorithms of social media, misinformation, all of that good stuff. So thank you for joining us today. Glad you're with us. If you want to be a part of the program, you can give us a call at 504-527-0800. You can also go to WSHO.com and scroll down and jump in the chat room there. We'll be checking that a little bit throughout the show. Got two main topics for you today. I want to talk a little bit about whether or not you're able to discern when you're being fed propaganda, and as opposed to you coming across a truth that you should then be concerned about. And then the other thing is we're going to find out toward the bottom half of the show, how many of you would support another Trump January 2021? Think about what President Trump did in January of 2021. And you may not be thinking about what I'm thinking about, so you'll have to tune in to find out what I'm referring to. But would you support it again, especially if it has the same effect that it had in 2021? So there's your little tease for the bottom half of the show. I want to key in on one particular thing that I know is going to be a sensitive topic for this particular audience. But I bring it up primarily because I think it's an important example to learn what it is exactly we're dealing with in America today. In a lot of ways, we as a lot of different ways, we as Americans, we are not really any longer living under a representative government. This is a fact that I know you're aware of. I think historians, I don't know how many years into the future it's going to take, but I do think that historians will look back at this particular time, maybe going back to the Bush years. I think the republic has fallen. And we're living right now in the slow collapse. We're post-constitutional for sure. And because we're post-constitutional, we're no longer a nation of laws. In many ways, and I would say more so than not, we've become a nation of men. And this isn't a Republican problem or a Democrat problem. This is a Republican and Democrat problem. This isn't just a citizens versus the government problem. We are now living under a government by the screen people, of the screen people, and for the screen people. Whether it's the screens in our houses, whether it's the screens on our phones, whether it's the screens on our tablets, the screens on our computers, wherever we pretty much get all of our information, we get everything that we know about most things that we feel confident that we know about. We get those things from a screen. And so because we get those things from screen, there are screen people. There are screen people that now feed us information. Now, we've all heard about Joe Biden's alleged vaccine mandate for private companies employing 100 people or more. I mean, it was all over the news, right? And even before he announced it on September 9th, it was all over the news. Now, his announcement has jeopardized the employment of millions of Americans and increased worker shortages in critical domains such as healthcare. You understand, right now, companies are mandating that their employees be vaccinated, and they're pointing back to the federal mandate. And you have airline workers, you have teachers unions, police unions, you have worker walkouts being done, doctors being ushered out of the buildings, nurses being, and remember, we're in worker shortages in the most critical domains, not to mention that our supply chain is pretty taxed at this moment. But when you start to get rid of able-bodied, committed workers in our healthcare system, that can't possibly be a good thing for the nation as a whole. Now, there's only one problem. Okay, so you've undoubtedly heard about this particular mandate from Joe Biden. There's one problem. It's all a mirage. Biden's so-called vaccine mandate doesn't exist. At least not yet. Now, that may be news for many of you, and I'm not saying this to defend Joe Biden, because I totally disagree with the federal mandate of the vaccine. I support many of you. I don't agree with many of you in the fact that you won't go get the vaccine, as we've talked about in great detail on this program. But I support your freedom to not have to get it. So far, all we have is his press conference and other such made-for-media huffing and puffing. I mean, we don't have a rule even claiming to be legally binding, so that even hasn't even been issued yet. So that's why you have nearly 24 Republican attorneys general who have publicly voiced their opposition to the clearly unconstitutional and illegal mandate. But here's the caveat, kids. They haven't filed suit against it yet. The Office of Indiana Attorney General confirmed that for me. There is no mandate to haul into court. But I suspect that that's part of the plan. According to several sources, so far it appears that no such mandate has been sent to the White House's Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs yet for approval. The White House and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, and the Department of Labor haven't released any official guidance for the alleged mandate. There's been no executive order. There's nothing but press statements. And despite what you may have been falsely led to believe by the media fantasy projection machine, press statements have exactly zero legal authority. Stephanie McFarland, the spokeswoman for the Indiana Occupational Safety and Health Administration, here's what she told the Federalist on October the 6th. Quote, "There is nothing yet that gives employers any mandate. The president has made an announcement on this asking OSHA to do it, but we've not yet seen anything come from it yet." Close quote. She also said that when the state agency gets any further information, that they'll review it. So to impose the public perception of a mandate, the Biden administration is following this unusual rulemaking process that most of us just don't know about. And we need to know how to get this information so that we can become educated about it, which is why you should tune in every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. here on WSHO Sunshine 800 AM, or follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to listen to this show. There's an emergency temporary standard, or what they call the ETS. Okay, now in the spring, the ETS rule took nearly 6 months to issue. Meanwhile, companies are telling reporters their vaccine mandates will have at the latest December deadlines. Now, for those who can't calendar, that's 4 months after Biden's non-existent mandate was proclaimed. And according to OSHA, an emergency temporary standard, or an ETS, takes up to 6 months to go into effect after the initial mandate is issued in the Federal Register, which again, for the proclaimed 100 employee mandate, it hasn't happened yet. Now, lawyers for big business were blunt about their love for this mandate mirage. Quote, "Everybody loves this cover. Many were already looking down the road at this, but the fact that they get to blame Biden is like manna from heaven." Close quote. This is from Minneapolis employment lawyer Kate Bischoff. That was a quote that she gave to Bloomberg Law in September. Now, using this ETS procedure instead of the normal federal rulemaking processes does two things. It both allows the Biden administration to push its demands faster without any public input or requirement of responding to public input, which is normally required of even legally laughable federal rulemaking like this one would be. And that's why part of this ETS rule has been overwhelmingly overturned in court. ETSs are overturned in court on a regular basis. OSHA has used that legal authority only about 10 times in 50 years. The very authority that the Biden administration is asking OSHA to use in order to make the mandates federally mandated for vaccines that authority has only been used 10 times in the last 50 years. And courts have decided challenges to 6 of those standards, nixing 5 of them and only upholding 1 of them. Now, there's many other reasons that any federal vaccine mandate would be obviously illegal and unconstitutional. Yes, the states have a plenary police power to regulate health and safety. And Congress has only those limited powers enumerated in the Constitution. Okay, so that wouldn't include the authority to impose a $155 fine, which by the way, $155 is today the equivalent of the $5 fine that was issued in the case that I've been telling everyone about, Jacobson versus Massachusetts. Go look it up. The city of Cambridge issued Jacobson for not taking the smallpox vaccine a $5 fine. Today, that would be $155. But the federal government, and especially the Congress, doesn't have that authority to impose a fine like that on an individual who declines to be vaccinated, much less to prevent him from earning a livelihood. But ladies and gentlemen, I've warned you that we're post-constitutional. So who needs the Constitution when you have an American people conditioned for compliance with even wildly outlandish things that the screen people insist they must think and do. I mean, this is truly 1984 type stuff. Now, earlier this week, the Wall Street Journal published a letter from Bruce Atkinson and made several excellent observations about the non-existent mandate, including the following. This comes straight from the article in the Wall Street Journal. Quote, "The mandate's non-existence shields the Biden administration from legal challenges that may ultimately restrict OSHA and their authority. Yet the mandate is still effective at compelling industries and companies into compliance, as it leaves room for any eventual issuance to target non-compliant entities. This implied cudgel is particularly effective on industries and companies that are dependent on federal spending or the goodwill of federal regulators. The non-existent mandate also allows so inclined state and local governments and companies to issue their own mandates, seemingly in lockstep with Washington. Hello, think about New Orleans. Think about Louisiana. You have a Democrat governor and a Democrat mayor, and so the Democrat president runs out and does a press conference and says things that say, hey, we're going to mandate the vaccine, and now they have cover to go ahead and do it at no political harm to themselves. The article goes on in the Wall Street Journal and says this following sentence: "The Biden White House has been well served by presenting a non-existent mandate as a done deal." Now let me see. What presidential administration does all this remind you of? Oh yeah, why, that Mr. Pen and Phone himself, Barack Hussein Obama. Now remember, we can look at, take it away from the pandemic and take away from the vaccine controversies for just a second. Go back to the Obama administration and remember when he issued his wildly unconstitutional Deferred Action for Child Arrivals, DACA, okay, DACA, remember that? It was simply a 2-page memo. Okay, this is to show you where the Biden administration and all these Obama hangovers are getting this stuff from. Okay, but that 2-page memo is still allowing some 616,000 people to simply ignore major United States laws, and could easily be reinstated by courts as litigation continues nearly a decade later. Okay, so it seems that given such unchecked gains from openly lawless action Democrats have turned into standard operating procedure over the years, Joe Biden feels free to reduce that constitutional contempt to simply a phone now. And what this government by press release, using scare quotes, also allows is for Republicans like Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb to complain about Biden's tyranny while using zip, nada, zilch of their elected authority to stop it. Holcomb has used the same executive rule by decree throughout the lockdown era without effective restraint by a supermajority Republican state legislature, even telling the press churches were required to deliver Christ's body and blood his way, while quietly keeping that part out of his executive orders. And surely, because government dictating religious exercise is obviously unconstitutional and would quickly have generated lawsuits. But this also allows weak Republicans and evil Democrats to shadowbox each other for the cameras while ordinary Americans suffer under their abdicated leadership. By the time Republican attorneys general get around to filing lawsuits over any eventually issued legal documents that fulfill Biden's promises, the vast majority of people not wanting government to force them into medical procedures will likely be unemployed, forcibly injected with treatments that almost have no track record, forced from their education paths, provided with fake documents like these citizens are beneath COVID rule exemptions, illegal aliens, and all the rest. This is why my frustration with Republicans is far greater than the frustration with Democrats. This is why, can we get off of The Democrats and what they do, we know what they do. They're leftists. We need to be in control of the people who we vote for, which are the Republicans. And this is how these weak Republicans keep letting Democrats go right on gleefully, disemboweling our rights, just like they have over the nearly 50 million of the American unborn. Gee, thanks, public servants. I mean, think about it. What have Republicans actually done on a federal level to stop abortion in the United States of America? The genocide that has happened over the last 40, 50 years. Tell me another one. Steve Scalise, Republican leaders here in the state of Louisiana. Tell me another one about how you love American liberties. Tell me about how you love the Bill of Rights. I'll believe that when I see you sacrificing anything substantial to fight for them. I've told this story before, and it seems like it bears repeating at this moment. Right after President Trump was elected, and the Republicans had a majority. They had the House, they had the Senate. I saw Steve Scalise inside. I saw Steve Scalise inside of a PJ's coffee shop right there in Elmwood. Here's basically the second highest ranking member of the majority party in the House of Representatives of the 435 members of the House of Representatives. And I took my shot. I went to him and I said, Congressman Scalise, it's very nice to meet you. I said, you don't know me. I'm a full-time staff member at a local church, and I just wanted to encourage you to go big and take your shot at fixing what's wrong. Because they're not going to like that President Trump has been elected, and they're going to do everything within their power to prevent his agenda from happening. And you're only going to have a very short amount of time. So please, for the sake of the country, will you let me pray for you? I prayed for courage for him. I said, look, this is do or die. This is of the most serious importance. And Steve Scalise was almost assassinated later I believe it was that spring, going into the early summer. But it wasn't much longer after that. Don't tell me about American freedom and liberties and use this jargon that you know is going to get us riled up. And you're not sacrificing anything. You're not doing anything substantial to fight for us. You're giving us words and you're giving us lip service. And you're not doing anything to prevent the Democrats and these leftists from destroying this country. What Democrats are doing, while Republicans are standing down yet again, is moral and constitutional abomination. Not even the fig leaf pose of pen signing balderdash filled documents is needed for today's Democrats. They don't even have to issue papers. President Trump would sign executive orders and he would hold the book up that had his signature written on it. And you would see that something was written on an official document and he officially signed it with people around him. The Democrats don't even need that today. Whatever they say, you end up doing. And you don't have any rights and you don't have any say in the matter. And there's no possibility for objecting to even them forcibly injecting things into your own body and the bodies of your children. These people believe that they are royalty. And many of you are acting like you're some kind of loser serf. But you're not. You cannot forget who you are. You are citizens endowed by God with inalienable rights. And by the way, that's including the right to consent. And the way that we consent, according to the Constitution, is through elected representatives. That's a Republican constitutional form of government. We do not consent. Not ever. We never consent to never elected dictatorial bureaucrats, to rules that restrict our rights and everyday lives, and somehow or another lose our human dignity. That isn't how these things work. I want to go to the phone lines now and go to line 1. Line 1, welcome to the Rock Worldwide Show.
Yes, Trey, this is Rusty.
Hey, Rusty.
How you doing?
I'm great.
Listen, I remember last year when they had these riots and Black Lives Matter became a very popular group of people, that there were, I think, hundreds of corporations that went along with these things of endorsing Black Lives Matters and through their companies. And I think our concern is not so much whether this stuff has to go through legally with the mandates with 100 people, if you have 100 people in your company, that you would have to have the shot or else you would get fired or the company would get fined pretty heavily. I think they can do it without that. That once Biden starts doing this stuff, so many of these companies are just going to jump on board, whether or not they pass it through legally or not. And if I could throw one more thought out there, because I know you, I don't know you.
No, you're good, man. Go ahead.
Italy, as of this week, has mandated that nobody can work, nobody at all, unless they have the shot. And I remember last year, I was talking to Bob, and I said, and Italy was cracking down when the virus first came out. I said, we're on our way to do what Italy was doing. And he disputed that, but it happened. All these shutdowns of businesses. And I see the same thing happening here, that they're going to try to shut down as many businesses as they can, either through legal mandates or just getting enough people on board. And that's what concerns me about when Biden comes up with this stuff. They may not do it all legally, they may not do it all through the courts, but we're going to end up like Italy. And how are those people in Italy going to survive? I mean, maybe they can still go to grocery stores, as far as I know, but if they don't have jobs, they don't have money to buy food.
Well, let me just jump in here for a second, Rusty. The comparison of the United States to a place like Italy, I feel like it fails us a little bit, because that's not, we don't have the same form of government, we don't have the same history, we don't have the same, we're not the same. Okay, so here's my greater point, and this is really directed this is what I want to stop doing. I want you and I, because we're having a public conversation here, I want you and I to stop having conversations about Washington, D.C. Okay? What I want us to start to do is to become more discerning, to walk in the wisdom that the Bible tells us we should seek after like it cost us everything, and to understand, because we have the mind of Christ, that we understand what is happening. Here's the problem. We don't understand that there is no mandate. He went out in front of a teleprompter, read a statement, and the media is carrying the water for him. And people post the articles from CNN and CNBC and all of the three-letter networks. They post the articles on social media, and people live on social media being fed the algorithms that only make them mad. So see, if you go back, Rusty, to the last several shows and you sort of combine everything, I'm trying to tell people you got to get off of social media. You don't realize you have no control over what you see. You're being fed what already simply confirms what you like and basically makes you engaged, which is only things that make you angry. We know this, so we have to avoid that. Number two, we can't take what we see in the media, whether we get it from Fox or whether we get it from MSNBC, whether we get it from The Blaze or whether we get it from NBC. We can't take what we see in the news and let that shape and form us. We have to be critical of those sources because we have to make ourselves aware of the biases that we're receiving from them. Now, if we can do both of those things, then we're going to be clear-headed enough and sober-minded enough that when we see that there's no law that's been passed by Congress, there's no executive order that's been written by the White House, there's only been a press conference, we don't have to get our panties in a bunch and worry about us falling into some kind of tyranny, because we're not. They haven't done anything, and what we need to do is we need to try and, as business owners or as people who work for companies, we need to know this information so that we can inform them that there is no mandate, so don't require it of me either. Because remember, Rusty, I don't agree with a federal mandate, and I don't think that businesses should be mandating people. And I'm for the vaccine. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. But Trey, this is my concern. That once these things are mandated, there doesn't seem to be anything to stop them. That you mentioned Obama a few minutes ago. And it seems like once they're there, everybody with a politically correct pop culture mind jumps on board. It doesn't have to even be politically passed by Congress. They're all aboard. And maybe you and I, or people of faith, will maybe withstand the stress of the times. But other people are going to hurt a lot. Be hurt very bad. I mean, everyone's going to be hurt. But we can discern the times, and that helps. But in my mind, though, it doesn't take a political pass of some political bill or something to get through. We're living in times that just whims can carry the day.
Well, Rusty, that's why I say that I think we're post-constitutional. I think we are beyond the scope of our government as was founded, and that's why I think we're already we're living in the collapse of the republic. So now what are we going to do with that? Are we going to continue to deceive ourselves, and because they're playing music out on the deck, we're going to try to ignore the fact that the ship is going down? Or are we going to, as kingdom people, do that which is required of kingdom people and followers of Christ and let the chips fall where they may? Rusty, thank you for calling. I want to go to Steve in Madisonville, I believe. Steve in Madisonville, welcome to the Rock Worldwide Show.
How are you doing, Brother Trey?
I'm great, thank you.
This is a very excellent subject. If you wholeheartedly in every word that came out of your mouth today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the time and effort you put into this presentation. Yes, we're in post-constitution and some other things. And until the people deploy and do what people do, interact with people, quit interacting with artificial intelligence, and interact with people like-minded and also not to think like we do. And we will learn more about the enemy, and then we will know biblically and as a Christian and as a conservative how to reply to those things that they are saying. And I think that more people, as they realize this, will understand, why did I give up my rights without a fight? What happened during the years of education? What happened during the years of some turmoil? And I'm not going to say the body of Christ, that church. I'm going to talk about church houses. What happened in social things that went on? What happened that we let the truth get away and let things that can only destroy people become that which is talked about? Why did we let that happen? I'm 71 years old. I've been fighting this fight since 1972 when I got out of the military. And I've been bloodied, I've been hit, I've been in court, I've been in jail, I've been through it all. And I think the people and a constitutional republic that we're fighting for, I also believe that we're dying for, and I also believe the people who don't agree with me, I'm willing to die for them too, because that's what the oath to the Constitution means. So, what are we going to do? Are we going to go down without a fight? I'm not talking full-blown revolution. I'm saying, are we going to go down without a fight and keep handing it to them and believing, excuse my English, crap? That's all they're feeding us. And until we start feeding each other, like edifying the church, then we're not going to get there.
Steve, I totally agree with you. Thank you for the phone call. I appreciate your service. Probably the biggest point that I agree with you, I think that where we are strategically placed, all of us are, no one has control over where they're born. We just all happen to be born or chose to immigrate to this country because we wanted to be here. So some of us were born here. We should be grateful for that. Some of us immigrated here because we wanted to be here. Whatever the case is, I still think that this place has something about it that is worth, like Steve said, fighting for. I agree with that. But I do want to separate. In fact, let's go into the chat room here. I want to separate how we live and act as kingdom people and as Messiah people, as Christians, with how we behave and act as U.S. citizens, as Americans. In the chat room at WSHO.com, Bishop says, sounds like you found a volcano full of guile, a nation full of humans who easily follow illusions, delusions, confusions. You make the people look dumber and dumber. How does this help us now? Well, the point is not to make people look dumber and dumber, Bishop, but the point is to bring out and to see what is happening right now. The point is, rather than walk around in illusions, delusions, and confusions, if we can face reality, I believe there's a chance. YN said, our citizenship is not in this dump. I agree. As you've heard me say, we're kingdom people. Our citizenship is of the kingdom of God, where Jesus is Lord of Lords and Kings of Kings, ruling and reigning until his enemies have become his footstool. We are a part of that already, but not yet, kingdom of God. But we live here in the United States of America. And YN, if you don't, well then, maybe you should come here to help us. Bishop also said, Steve Scalise's but one of a long train of Republicans for decades who have beguiled multitudes. But if the public devils and Christians can be kept dumb, then they will smilingly vote for more of the same upon themselves. For the public wants to return to their hedonisms. That's a pretty big and pretty it's a pretty intense statement there. I do think that these career politicians do have their best interest in mind, regardless of how good they are. And a lot of them, I don't even think that they realize that they do. RG said, isn't this social media? No. So if you're talking about this chat room on this website, no, this isn't social media. YN said, doesn't sound like he is discerning very well. This is not the kingdom. We are in the great setup for the great reset. Okay, YN, what I'm referring to is that it is true that Jesus is ruling and reigning right now. He is sitting at the right hand of the powers, sitting at the right hand of the powers, as he told Caiaphas. He is ruling and reigning as King of Kings, Lord of Lords. All authority has been given to Jesus Christ in heaven, earth, and below the earth. That is right now. That is a part of us right now. So now what do you do, YN, as a kingdom person to fulfill the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray? Thy will be done on this earth as it is in already in heaven. Bishop said, we all forget Obama brought us in 2014, the huge caravans of immigrants across the border and riding it on trains. Those images were real, and Biden is multiplying it deeper because the Republicans, again, simply capitulate to all of it so they can invest in the stocks to make money. Should we bring back Obama or keep Biden? I would say that this is the third term of Barack Obama. And then Robert said, it's simple. If you trust God, you will know what is truth. And when you hear the lies, you will know the difference. Robert, I wish that was that simple. I really do. But nothing could be further from the truth. The majority of people don't know truth. Just like people are worried about Joe Biden's federal vaccine mandate, and no such thing exists. Robert, stay with us if you're in the chat room. I want to give you a different example. President Trump, former President Trump, is about to do something that I think is potentially going to be devastating to the next two election cycles. I'm talking about 2022 and I'm talking about 2024. If you think it's important for the Democrats to not control the House of Representatives and to not control the Senate, then many of you are going to have to rethink your feelings. And this is what makes this difficult, what I'm about to share with you. Many of you see President Trump as some messianic figure. And I'm not saying that you compare him to Jesus. Please don't mishear or mischaracterize my words. What I'm saying is you see him as sort of a divinely appointed savior figure of this nation. Now, as we've just heard, YN would push back to that, and I would applaud YN for going after anyone who would try to make that case. I am not. What I am asking you to do is to really take a step back, put down a little bit of the Trump Kool-Aid, keep to what you know he did good for the country, but also try to remember who he was around 2014. Try to remember the guy from The Apprentice. Try to remember the man who has been how he has been for the majority of his life. Even while he was president, try and remember sort of how petty he was. Sort of how, remember how he used his Twitter account to be sort of beneath the office of the presidency. Again, we're going to keep in mind all the good things that he did. But I want to warn you about what he is telling the Republican Party right now. Trump is positioning himself to play hostage politics. And we already know that he has a track record of this. When I asked you if you would be willing to support President Trump, another January 2021 led by President Trump, I'm not talking about 1/6. I'm not talking about the protests and the couple hundred people that stormed the Capitol. I'm talking about the Georgia special election that caused us to lose the Senate. Donald Trump is telling Republicans that they must agree that the 2020 election was stolen, or he is going to aid the Democrats. Now, you've got Democrats right now who are complaining that Donald Trump is plotting to suppress votes. And they have a point. But fortunately for the Democrats, the votes that he's plotting to suppress are those of his own supporters. The votes that he's going to suppress are your votes. And this is what I'm saying. In January of this year, in the 2 Georgia Senate runoffs, turnout in the Republican strongholds fell because Mr. Trump told his voters the election in November had been stolen and the state's GOP officials were corrupt. And the Democrats narrowly won both seats in the conservative state, handing the party unified control of Congress and paving the way for an ideological unleashed Biden administration. Do you remember January 2021? Because now the former president is threatening out loud that he might repeat this act of electoral sabotage in the next national elections. Here's his quote. Quote, "If we don't solve the presidential election fraud of 2020, which we have thoroughly and conclusively documented, Republicans will not be voting in 2022 or 2024. It's the single most important thing for Republicans to do." Close quote. This was what Mr. Trump said in a statement this past Wednesday. Now, what's notable isn't that Mr. Trump continues to deny his election defeat and push for increasingly futile audits that are going to go nowhere. Mr. Trump will never admit that he lost. And many of you won't either. And listen, two things can be true at the same time. You can hold to the belief, based on a YouTube video that you've seen, based to a state legislative committee testimony that you've seen. Here's what you can't do. You can't show me court documents that have been filed and accepted at any level, state or federal, that would indicate that there was a nationwide conspiracy to throw the election for Joe Biden. There are plenty of examples of people who have been convicted, people who have been arrested and will more than likely be convicted. There's enough evidence to show that there have been instances of election fraud. Nothing that has risen to the level of a nationwide coup of President Trump. So you can believe and you can hold that there are plenty of evidences of election fraud that took place in the 2020 election. You will not be able to evidentially, despite what Mr. Trump says, you will not be able to evidentially prove that case that nationwide this was done, even in the 5 states that are under contention. Because you have to be able to have the evidence, and it has to be able to be at the level that can be accepted in a court of law. And it's just not there yet. And I don't think it ever will be. Trump's never going to admit that he lost. And Trump never losing, his election denial, is his pure ego. And look, Democrats have already used Mr. Trump's election denial against the GOP. It's already happened. In great effect, California recalled their governor. And we had maybe one of the best, the most articulate, the most well-argumented Republican black conservatives in Larry Elder, and they used it against him to re-elect the same governor that they recalled. And if you go right now and follow a very tight Virginia governor's race, they're using it again. Mr. Trump's escalation is that he is now explicitly tying Republican acceptance of his election fantasy to a threat of electing Democrats as retribution. The message to Republicans is that if they don't loudly pretend that he won the last election, because that's the other part that's true. It is true that Joe Biden won the election, whether legally or illegally. He was the victor. So admitting that Trump lost and admitting that Joe Biden won doesn't negate that there may have been somewhere down the road. Historically, we may look back and some evidence may show itself that yes, this was a nationwide overthrow of the government. But if they don't pretend that he won the last election, Mr. Trump is making sure that the GOP loses the next one too. Now, refusal to accept election outcomes in modern American politics. Listen, this is not exclusive to Trump or the Republicans. Okay? Much of the Democrat Party and the intellectual class did not accept the legitimacy of Mr. Trump's 2016 victory. I mean, time and time and time and time and time and time again. Hillary Clinton went out there and called President Trump an illegitimate president because she just could not accept the fact that she lost to Donald Trump, and the American people did not accept her. They rejected her. In the same state of Georgia that we're talking about now, Stacey Abrams, the celebrated Georgia gubernatorial candidate, she has still refused to concede that she lost in 2018. And just as recently as 2021, congressional Democrats initiated an effort to overturn a certified Iowa House race before thinking better of it, of course. But one crucial difference between Mr. Trump and those Democrats is that Democrats would never be self-defeating enough to try to leverage their election gripes against the interest of their own voters. Democrats have endorsed and amplified Miss Abrams' fictions of a stolen election to turn out more Democrat voters so that progressive policies might prevail in the future. See, Stacey Abrams can yell, Brian Kemp stole the election from me, and then she went out over the next year and a half and registered like 2 million new Democrat voters that turned out for this special election. You think Trump is going to mobilize more people to go out and vote for him, or you think he's going to go out and work to get more people into the Republican caucus? Because Trump's calculations are completely different. When President Trump's ego is on the line, your interests are secondary. And look, he might not like it if progressive control of government happens and American energy production gets choked off, or social media companies bludgeon and censor conservatives. But his priority, that's what we're talking about here, is that the GOP candidates show obeisance to his claims that he was robbed in November, and he's willing to help Democrats if Republicans refuse, or if they just stay silent. The Wall Street Journal editorial board wrote after the Georgia runoffs back in January. Listen to this quote from the Wall Street Journal editorial board of the opinion pages. That's a conservative group of editors. Here's their quote. In an article that they wrote, by the way, let's see, this would have been written, it was updated on 1/6 of this year. Shows a picture of President Trump on January 5th. The title of the article is Trump Loses the Senate. Subquote, his post-election tantrums hand the government to the left. Nobody turned out because he was telling them that Georgia was corrupt and so their vote wouldn't matter. Here's the quote. Quote, we hope Republicans keep Mr. Trump's contribution to these defeats in mind over the next 2 years as their taxes and energy costs rise, as woke cultural mandates rain down from Washington, and as more of the economy comes under political control. We could have had gridlock, ladies and gentlemen. We could have had a Republican-controlled Senate that was filibuster-proof. There was no chance of all of these things happening, that the spending could have been cut. Everything that you're seeing now that's happened because we lost 2 easily winnable Senate runoffs in Georgia. And thanks to President Trump, it didn't happen. And he's willing to do it again because his ego is more important. With the Biden administration's polarizing overreach, the 2022 elections are an opportunity for the GOP to retake Congress and check the divisive progressive assault on the United States economy and on the law. But that was also true in 2021. In the Georgia races, we had a chance as conservatives and as Republicans to put a check on the Biden administration. That should have been enough to have a huge turnout. But Mr. Trump, he's telling you, if you want to win, if you want to stop Joe Biden, here's what you can't do. You can't tell your voters that their vote doesn't matter. So are you going to pay for Trump's narcissism? And that's not just a question. It's not a question of whether or not you will pay. It's that you will pay for Trump's narcissism. And some of you are going to get mad at me hearing that. And you're going to say that I'm Trump hating. And you're going to say that I'm not putting the... I'm saying that we need to take a step back and realize who Mr. Trump at his core is. And that if he has power, and if everything's going well, and if his brand is on point, then he's going to be happy as a lark, and he's going to bludgeon the very people that we don't like, namely the Democrats. But Mr. Trump, prior to announcing his run for office, never supported Republicans, only contributed to Democrats. And yes, because he was a New York businessman. And yes, he was in Hollywood, so he was around liberals. But he supported and gave money to Pelosi and the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation and hung out with Jeffrey Epstein, who, by the way, didn't kill himself. That's who Mr. Trump has been. And because Democrats were against him, it was easy for him to be petty and to try to bludgeon them to their political deaths. But you're going to pay if you don't demand that President Trump do the right thing and either don't run or don't require that Republicans go out there and put this narrative out that somehow or another he didn't lose in the 2020 election. Because whether it was stolen or whether it was legit, evidence hasn't been put on a legal basis by which to reverse that. It's not going to happen. And even if you want to put an asterisk by that, he still lost. But if we turn out more voters in individual districts, we can flip and we can stop this administration, and we can begin looking to 2024 to see, do we bring Trump back with a Republican majority, or do we find some fresh blood and stop the bleeding that this third Obama term as President of the United States will hopefully go away. Thank you for joining us here on the Rock Worldwide Show here on WSHO Sunshine 800 AM. We are going to call it a day on that. Coming up next, Issues and Answers with Elder Mike Indes. So don't go anywhere. Remember to oppose progressivism wherever it rears its ugly head. Illuminate the night of truth. We'll see you next